tutorial video, I wanted to show you how to make reactive menus. These are menus that are not selectable unless, for instance, the right object is selected, or menus that show a preference or condition is active. Why we need this functionality in our tools is so the user can quickly assess conditions and make judgments without having to see a debug log for an error once they press on a menu option when they've got an inaccurate selection in, say, their hierarchy or their project view. So here we are in Unity, and we've got our default layout and we've got a few things set up in our scene already. Now what we want to do is we want to bring a mech into this scene and have a look around. So the first thing we'll do is we'll look at our mech model that we've imported. And this is the Assault mech you can find in the Unity Asset Store, and I'll leave a link in the description. So we drag our mech into our scene, and we want to put it at 000 because I know that's where the guarding spot is. And as you can see, if we actually press play on this mech, then it will do a funny little walk and then stop. Now, because this is a legacy model, what happens is this actually comes in with an animation component, not an animator component. And we actually want to change that because the problem with having the animation component is we can't use our normal animator to set up all the animations and set up our nice state machine in there. So if we look at the actual model itself, we'll see that in the rig, we have legacy set up. Now, usually we just switch this over to generic and move on, but I think in this project I might be bringing in more of these models with legacy. So let's create a little tool, because this video is about how to create menus and where to put them, etc. So we're going to create a tool this time with a menu option to change this legacy to generic. So what I'll do is I'll start by going into my assets view and creating an editor folder. And in this editor folder, I want to create a tool called the Fix Rig tool. So we'll create a C# script and we'll call it Fix Rig tool. Now, if we open this up in Unity, you'll see we have our standard template coming in. Now, this isn't going to be a mono behavior. This is going to have a menu option, so we can get rid of all these details. But because we're going to be using some editor functions, we'll bring in the Unity editor library. So next thing to do is to create a menu item. So menu item, and the location of our menu item is, we're just going to chuck it on the top for the moment. So my menu, which will be on our top bar, tools, and we'll call it Fix Rig. There we go. Okay, so public static void Fix Rig tool menu option. There we go. So that's the beginning of our menu option. Now what we want to do is we actually want to get the selection. If I go back into Unity, I know it'll start. What we want to do is we want to get the selection in our asset database in our project view. So to do this, if we go back into our Visual Studio, we need to get the selection asset GUIDs, and I'll show you how to do that now. So we want to make sure we've got something selected. So we go selection asset GUIDs. What this does is it actually passes us back all the asset GUIDs that are actually selected in the project view, as the name suggests. And we want to make sure that, you know, we actually have something in there. So we test for null, and we're also, for good measure, just make sure the length of the array that's passed back is over 0. So now we want to get the path to the asset that we've got selected. And we're only going to do one asset in this circumstance, but you could roll through all of the assets that are listed in the asset GUID that we get back there. But for now, let's just grab the first one. And we know there's one there because we've tested for length is greater than 0. So GUID to asset path, and again, selection, asset GUIDs, 0. There we go. Okay, so we've got the asset path to where our model is. Now, there's a handy functionality for changing the rigs, etc. in any asset that we've got selected, and that's using a model importer. So we'll just put a note in here, change the rig type, and we'll do model importer. We'll get a model importer, and we'll get the model importer get at path, and we'll pass it the asset path, and we'll return it as a model importer. Okay, so what this is doing is it's getting the model importer at the path that we've selected, and it's a handy little functionality in the model importer class. So, nice and simple, model importer, the animation type, animation type, there we go. And we're going to change this to the animation type generic. Okay, so what this is going to do is if we look back into our Unity, we can see that we've got the legacy animation type here, and we're going to actually change this to generic. Now the thing is, if we were to just run this script as it was, it would change it, but it would then pop up a dialog box saying, do you want to make this change, etc. And we don't want that, we just want to apply it straight away. So we're just going to put a note here that we're applying the changes. Just in case anybody comes back to the script later on and wonders what we're doing here. So the asset database, there's a great thing called write import settings if dirty. And what this does is it basically marks the asset at the asset path as dirty, knowing full well that it's going to basically need to be saved and changed. And then with the asset database, we then import the asset path, and import asset options, and we force that to be updated. So what this is doing is it's basically running that save dialog that you see if you were to change it manually. So let's save this and go back into Unity. Now we can see that our tool has actually been added to my menu, Tools, Fix, Rig. And if we were to select this asset mech and press on here and press Fix Rig, you'll notice it will do the operation and change this to generic, and will save us pressing the condition yes condition. Now the thing is, with this tool, and this is what we want to look at in this particular tutorial, if I was to select this folder, this tool is still available, and if I was to press this, it would complain. It would say, you know, why are you doing this on the folder? That doesn't make any sense. Now, we don't want to be able to do that. We want to basically restrict it to just doing it on model importers. So what we can do with menu options is we can actually produce a validating functionality alongside, as long as it has the same name. So within here, what we can do is if we take the name out of here for the menu item, and we'll just put this as a string, okay, menu, oh, there we go, and I remove this up here and say okay menu. The reason we do that is because if I copy and oh, no, don't want to copy and paste all that. We want to copy and paste this. There we go. And get rid of the functionality in the middle here. And I'll just call this validate. And we'll stick in here validate equals true. Now, the reason we use that constant is if I decided later on I wanted to change this menu item name, I wouldn't have to change it in both places. And if you don't do this sort of thing, you might find that one day you come back and you change the menu name in one of these, but you forget the validate and everything starts going wrong and you wonder why. So it's best when you're using strings in multiple places to basically produce a constant like this to keep it so that they remain the same between the two. Now the validate option I've put on here, what this does is it says that for this menu item, this is the validation method that we should be running. And these return a flag, return a ball to say whether yes or no, this is valid to be used. And in this case, what we want to do is we want to say, make sure there's a selection and also make sure that selection is a model importer. So what we can do is we can actually steal a little bit of code from up here. And if we put this in here and we say, if this is null, or if the length of the array passed back equals 0, then return false. It's not valid. And the next thing to do is to say, okay, well, we've got an item, but is it the right type of item? So we'll use our asset path and we'll get our model importer. So we'll steal this bit of code. We'll put this in here. And what we'll do is we'll say return whether the model importer equals null. So what this is basically doing is it's saying if you've selected something at the asset path and you're setting it as a model importer, if that says no, this isn't a model importer, so it returns null, in this case actually returns not null because we want to say true if it is there, this will basically return whether this is valid. So if we save and we go back into Unity, go back into Unity, there we are. Now I press on my model, go into tools, the option is available, press on my folder, go into tools, the option is not available. See how it's grayed out there and I can't actually select it. So that is how you do a validation to make sure that you've got the correct thing. And you can do this for nearly any option actually in the project view or in the hierarchy. And I'll show you how to do it in the hierarchy in a moment. But it's a really useful feature to make sure that designers or artists on your team aren't basically pressing menus when they're not meant to. Now there is a caveat here. Sometimes you'll want them to be able to press it and to return some details back in the console, whether it be an error or something like that. Say for instance, it's a type of model, but it has to have special options or it has to be a certain name or something like that for your tool to work. You might want to turn back, yes, you've got the right model, but it doesn't have these particular parameters. And that's very important to note because if they just see a grayed out option that they can't press, they will wonder, well, why can't I press that option? So the other thing to note here is it's all well and good having the menu up here, but it's a bit annoying when I've selected this and I've got a right click menu here that I actually have to still go up and press the items here. So what we can do is we can actually move the menu down here, and it's a very simple change to our script. If we come in and we look at my menu here, if we actually change this to assets and we save, and we come back into Unity, now we don't see the My Menu option here, but if we right click on this, you'll notice there's a Tools option, and there's my Fix Rig. It's moved down into the Assets menu. So now that we've changed our rig and our mech to the generic type, what we want to do is we actually want to plug in an animator on our mech and start plugging in these animations. So if we go to our Assault Mech, we can add in here an animator component. And I've already got an animator set up in my animations folder called Mech. It is a very basic one because this is a guarding mech. It's just going to look left and look right. Of course, in a real game, I'd have shoot and die and all the rest of it. But this is just for the tutorial. I've got look left and right. So if we jump back into our mech model and we pull out, we can actually start filling in these particular motions. So we can stick in a left, and within the right, we can stick in a right motion. And if we pop back into the scene and press play, then we'll see the mech start moving about. And it's doing this little move. Now, the problem with this particular action is you'll notice that the mech is actually in a really weird sort of pose at the moment. And if we were to be in the game and this was to drop in, we would notice a quick jump on the animation state. So let's just fix the first frame and have this posed in its first frame. And you can use this script that I'm about to show you to actually pose characters or pose inanimate objects, or well, animate objects that are mechanical in nature, and you can pose them into a frame within the animation, so you can have still frame images, etc., being rendered out in Unity. So I'll show you how to do that now, and the main point is I'm going to put the menu so that when I right click on the hierarchy, I actually have the menu coming up in this drop down. So let's start. We'll jump back into our editor folder. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create a script. So create C# script. And this one's going to be copy animator first frame. There we go. So if we open this up in Unity, in Visual Studio, and we start in, this again, it's going to be a menu option, so we can get rid of this. And we're going to be using the editor library, so Unity editor, there we go. And let's jump in. So it's going to be a menu item. And this menu item, whereas we had assets to put it into the project view, this one, we use game object. And that will pop it up in our drop down from our project view. And we'll call it copy first frame. Okay, cool. And we'll just create the functionality, static void, and it's going to be copy first frame menu item. There we go. And you can call these menu items whatever you want. I just choose to call them something close to the class and stick menu item on the end of it. Now we're going to want to get the selection that we have. So the active game object that we've got selected in our scene. So active game object, and to do this we use the selection class and we just ask for the active game object, and we just test that we've got an active game object to work with. Now we want to get the animator component, and to do this, active game object, get component animator. And the next thing to do is we want to get the animation clip from the animator controller. So the animation clip, and we'll call this preview clip. And we'll take our animator, we'll take our runtime animator controller, and we'll get the first animation clips from that controller. And then we can preview the clip. Well, we can take the preview clip, we can sample that animation for our object, and we can set the time to 0. We want the first frame from that. And then there's a really cool piece of functionality called editor scene manager. Editor scene manager. And for this we need the scene management library, and we're going to mark our scene. Don't want to mark all of our scenes. We're going to mark our scene as dirty, and we're going to collect from the editor scene manager the active scene. So what scene we've got here. Now the reason this is super cool functionality is if we were to run this sample animation, so what this is doing, this preview clip sample animation, is it's basically taking our object and sampling the animation and setting that onto the object. Now, because we're running this in a menu item, if we were to just run this, it wouldn't mark the scene as dirty if the scene hadn't already changed. And we want to do that because we want to tell the user, you need to save your scene because you've made a change to it. Because if you were to exit the scene after running this without doing anything else, this wouldn't tell the user to save, it wouldn't call up a save when you left, and this change wouldn't actually be saved into your scene. So the next time you come back, you would have to run this again, and every single time until you made a save afterwards. So this is a way of telling the user, the scene is dirty, you need to save. Now the other thing we want to do, because this is a tool in our project view that we're going to, in our hierarchy, that we're going to be making a change, we're going to want to make sure that we have an undo for this. In case the user goes, actually, I really didn't want to do that. I want to make a change. I want to go back. Now, to do that, what we do is we use the undo queue. And I talk about this more in some of my other tutorials. But here, we want to record the objects that we're going to be changing. Now, when you sample an animation, it basically changes a set of transforms and a set of other things within the objects. But it doesn't just change the first object. Otherwise, we could just use record object and just give it the top object. But in this case, we know we're actually changing all of the transforms. We know we're not doing anything else to the actual scene, but if the animator was changing some effects or some colors or whatever in your materials, you want to make sure you are copying those as well. So what we'll do is we'll go active game object, get components in children, and we want the plural of that, and we're just going to say get the transform. For some reason that didn't. There we go. So what this is doing is it's getting us all the transforms from our components that we know we're changing in our animator, and it's going to record that into our undo queue. And we'll just give it a name that the user could tell what was in the undo queue, setting pose from first frame. There we go. And we can save that. That will now do our copy first frame menu item. But as before, we want to make sure that we're selecting the right object. if we select something that doesn't have an animator on it, why would we want to actually process this? Why would we want to give this option? So again, let's do the same thing as we did previously in the other menu. We'll save off our menu so that if we make a change to it, we know where to get it. We know that it will impact all the changes across the menus. That's the validate and the menu item itself. So we're pressing the K menu there, and then we'll produce the validation. So menu item, K menu, and we'll set it as the validation method. And again, I like to just basically use the same name and just stick validate on the end. Nice and simple. And also, it's got to return a flag. Sometimes you'll forget to do that and you'll keep it as void and it won't do anything because it doesn't warn you about it if you set the validate in the attribute here. So you have to make sure you remember to set bool. Though when you start trying to do a return on a void, it should come up for you. Now we want to make sure that we have an object. So selection active object, active game object, sorry, not active object, active game object. We want to make sure that's there. And then we also want to make sure that that active game object has the component animator. And that's it. That's our validate method done as well. So let's save that, go back into our game. Here we are. And on our assault mech, now if we right click, got our tools menu. And it's got the copy first frame option there. And if I go on to something else that doesn't have an animator, the tools menu isn't even there. It doesn't come up because the option's not available, as you see through the validation. So let's press on our assault mech, right click, tools, copy first frame, and boom, there it is. And you'll notice our scene has also been marked dirty. And we can undo it. So again, if I was to save this scene and then come in, press tools, copy first frame, there we go. The scene is marked as dirty and we're ready to go. So we can save now. And when we press play, we'll see it's there and it's gone from the first frame and there's no jitteriness. It's not jumping into that frame from its set pose just from the model. And there's our mech doing its guarding. So the last part in the tutorial I wanted to talk about was actually putting tick marks next to menu items. Now you might ask, why would we do this? Well, if for instance, say your mech was running through the scene and it got hurt, it took damage and then would die, but you were actually wanting to have a debug mode where it had infinite health, you could actually put an option in one of the menus that had a tick next to it that said whether you had pressed to have that debug option active or whether it was off. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to do that here by just actually turning on or off viewing arcs in the scene. Because I have a very basic mech script already set up, and here it just displays a viewing arc. And let's say you had lots of these guards all around. These viewing arcs could be really useful, and I'll show you if I press play, that these viewing arcs, we'll go back to the scene view, show where this actual mech is viewing as its animation is going across. And look, he's guarding quite well, but there's loads of holes. We could probably go in and take it out. So let's put in an option, a menu item that turned off these viewing arcs and turn them on. Because the thing is, if we've got loads of these mechs around and they've all got these viewing arcs, they may be obstructing our view and we don't really want to see this debug viewing arc at the moment. So we want to turn them on or off. So let's do that. So we'll stop that there and we'll create a new script. And this script we're going to be calling, so create C# script. We're going to call this show viewing arcs option. Okay, so I'll open up in Visual Studio and we'll have a look at some of the code that's already in there as well. So we'll just get rid of this to start off with. Now here's our mech script. And basically it's a very, very basic script that just has drawing the arcs on the draw Gizmos option and a few options for where the arc actually is, which transform it's attached to. the angle of the arc and the depth, how far out the arc goes. And if you're interested, I use handles and I use the draw solid arc for that to actually display the arc going across. Now, this is the important part to look at here. I have game editor preference options, and this is my own script that has this show viewing arcs flag. And it's a very basic static class that has a few options to turn on or off, and it saves these options in the editor prefs. Now, the reason I do this is I don't want to actually be calling editor prefs with a string every time we actually run this on draw Gizmos, so I just save it off into a variable that's a nullable variable. That means that the first time this looks, say, is this showing view arcs option on? Well, we don't have it set, so we don't know. We get it from the editor prefs and we set it there. And after that, every time we change it, we actually change the local variable and set the bool there, because we don't care. We're not going to be changing it, that option that we're going to be processing this string into editor prefs every time. So we're going to want to change this option in our script. So, like usual, we come in, we create a menu item, and of course this is going to take from the editor library. This we're going to actually have on the very top bar, and we're going to call this my menu, and we're going to give it a subfolder of options, and we're just going to call this show viewing arcs. And then as for the function, static void show viewing arcs option menu item, and you can cut that down if you really want to. And we're going to use our game editor preference options, the script I just showed you, and all we're going to do is very simply give it the opposite. So that is just going to be flipping it. And if we go into Unity and we press on this option, nothing changes. But if we go into if we toggle over to the scene view, it does change. And this is because we're not actually redrawing the scene view until we actually go into it. And I'll show you, if I actually go around the scene view with my mouse, nothing happens until I go into the scene view. So we'll want to change that first off. So to do that, we have scene view, and we can just use the repaint all option. So I'll just save that, go back into Unity, and now when I press it, it repaints straight away. Now the thing is, I could look at my scene and see whether the viewing arcs are actually on or off, but it'd be very nice to have a check mark to tell me if they are. Let's say there's a different bug in my code, or I'm not actually close to those, or the viewing arcs are very small and I can't tell whether they're on or off. I could actually go into here and see whether they are. So it's, for these sort of options, it's always a good idea to have a check mark. It just makes the tool that little bit better and a little bit nicer for the user to use. So let's do that. So this is one of the really handy things about the validate option. And again, we're going to be using this same thing. So we'll be calling this kmenu, and we'll just come in const string kmenu equals that. So there we go. Menu item, kmenu, and yes, this is going to be the validate. Now, obviously, we don't need to validate this option. I mean, we could say, is there viewing arcs, and whether that option actually exists or not, but we're not validating. But the handy thing is, because this validation runs before the menu is actually shown, we can use it to actually set the check mark on the actual option. So if we come into here, we can do menu, set checked, and we can pass it the menu name, which will basically do a lookup and put the check mark next to it. And we can use our flag to say whether it should be shown or not. And because it's a validate option, we should change it to return bool, and return something. In this case, we're just going to return true because it's always going to be validated as true. So again, we'll save, we'll go back into Unity. And once we're in Unity, if we go into my menu, we can now see a tick mark, a check to say whether those option is on or whether it is off. So that's it for this tutorial on reactive menus. I hope you found it useful. We looked at where we should put our menus, whether we should have them at the top in the hierarchy or the project view, depending on the context that we're actually doing, whether we're pressing on something in the hierarchy, we should do it in there rather than having it in the menu. We also looked at validating that menu option, whether to grey it out or whether not to show it. And also spoke about whether you should actually do that or whether you should pump out a message into the console or pop up a dialog box saying, look, you've selected the right item, but it doesn't have these components, or you haven't selected all the items that you need to perform this particular tool's action. And then lastly, we showed how to actually tick boxes, tick menu items, so that we know that they're actually selected or not selected at a glance without having to search for those items and see whether they're actually turned on. And you can use this, as I say, for having immortal modes and lots of debug options across your game. You can quickly assess, what have I got turned on? Why is this happening? And have them there right away. So I hope you found something useful in this video. If you did, let me know by tapping the like button. And if you haven't done so already, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps the YouTube algorithm push this video further and also tells me that you're enjoying this content and that I should create more of it. And there's plenty more of these tutorials where this one came from. So again, I hope you got something out of this video. And as always, thanks for watching.